Okay, let's talk about training responses. This is part 7 of chapter 3. I actually don't like this part. And the reason is because the changes that happen physiologically or metabolically are pretty obvious. Uh, but they're only obvious if you have a correct training program. It's far too easy to make mistakes in designing a training program. So really, it's probably more fun to spend more details on how to set up a training program. Unfortunately, there's a lot that goes into that. So what we'll do here is we'll talk about the metabolic changes and the physiological changes that are seen when a training program is successful. But keep in mind, far too many training programs are not successful. We need to really pay attention to that. But that's the application part, and that's where we coach or we try to design our own program. And later on, you may see some a review of some software that athletes can use to track their training progress to be able to identify when the training program is uh, working and when it's not working. So what changes are there? Well, the main metabolic adaptations, typically an increase in VO2 max. But if we take someone who's already fit, we may not see much change in VO2 max, but we can see a change in performance. Increased capacity to store muscle and liver glycogen, increased use of fat as a fuel, a shift in the lactate turn point to a higher running speed, uh, better running economy, less rate of oxygen consumption to run a particular speed. These are all main metabolic adaptations. So what are the causes? Well, the causes are increased capillarization, the number of blood capillaries that surround a muscle fiber. Those increase with training. That facilitates transport of oxygen to the muscle fiber, but also the removal of byproducts of generating ATP into the circulatory system. So carbon dioxide, lactate to another muscle, what have you. Glycolytic pathway adaptations. Sprint training leads to increase of certain glycolytic enzymes and ability to tolerate high levels of acidity. Maybe it's better buffering capacity. So the enzymes being what that allows the steps of taking glucose to yield ATP. Those enzymes are important. And you can have an increase in those enzymes, increase the speed and the capacity of anaerobic conversion of glucose to yield ATP. You have a change in mitochondria, and the number of mitochondria as well as the size of mitochondria. That allows for an increased ability to oxidize fat on top of oxidized carbohydrate. This leads to a reduced level of lactate production, especially at low levels of intensity. It causes a shift of the lactate turn point to faster speeds. Okay, again, this is a positive change. More mitochondria and larger mitochondria, better aerobic capacity to convert chemical energy to mechanical energy. There's also changes in muscle contractility. So how well a muscle generates force. Does training change the ability of muscle to generate force? Is there increased myosin ATPase activity, enhanced calcium handling, or just a better ability to recruit neuromuscularly muscle fibers, either the firing time of muscle fibers or the firing rate of muscle fibers. So there may be a neural component here. Increased capacity to recruit muscle mass, and where I'm going, neuromuscular recruitment model, increased ability of the brain to coordinate muscle fibers to generate the right amount of force at the right moment in time in the right direction. Short-term training benefits are not from metabolic changes. So if someone starts a run training program and in 2 weeks, they're all of a sudden doing better, it's not because there are metabolic adaptations, probably because the coordination of muscles has happened to a better extent and made them more effective at generating the right amount of force to run. Okay, the effective training can be seen quickly. VO2 max can increase within a week of intensive training, but again, that may be a neuromuscular part where the person has just learned how to run faster. To sustain improvements, training frequency, intensity, and duration need to be manipulated to increase training volume and intensity. And this is where the artwork of designing a training program comes in. And this is a really interesting area to dive into. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to talk about the effects of training and detraining. VO2 max can also decrease quickly with detraining. Now, detraining and tapering are different concepts. All right. Tapering is preparing for an event, and tapering is a gradual decline in training intensity and volume and frequency, whatever it may be. But tapering is a process that we use in endurance events and sprints as well to prepare the person best for competition on race day. Detraining is where you are losing fitness at a rapid rate. Okay? And detraining studies are done by studying people who they take subjects and they put them in the bed, and then they start testing the subjects after different periods of bed rest. So some of the, the next graph I'm going to show you is predicated on the Fick equation. You should know this. Rate of oxygen consumption is equal to the product of cardiac output and AVO2 difference. Cardiac output being heart rate, how fast the heart's beating, stroke volume being the amount of blood ejected with each beat. AVO2 difference being the amount of oxygen extracted by the blood. So the amount of oxygen in the artery minus the amount of oxygen in the venous return to the heart represents how much blood was extracted. So VO2 is really heart rate times stroke volume times AVO2 difference. So if we're going to see a difference in VO2, whether that be submax or maximum, we're going to see a difference in either heart rate, stroke volume, or AVO2 difference. So here's some data. This is pretty, this is actually the detraining. I didn't put the training data in there. This is detraining. So here we have percent change, negative, 0, and then higher percent change. And so if we put someone in a bed at day 0, and then they don't do any training for up to 84 days, oh, that's painful. We'll see changes, but if they, in this type of research, they'll pull a person out of the bed and do a graded exercise test. And if you have data like that, this is what would typically be seen as days of detraining increase. Over time, you'll see, well, here's VO2 max. VO2 max will decline over time. It will decline. Why is VO2 max declining? Well, you can actually see an increase in heart rate. Okay, that seems odd, but you can see heart rate go up. AVO2 difference maybe increases a little bit. This might actually speak to benefits of tapering, but then you start to see a decrease in AVO2 difference. Stroke volume is the big issue here. Stroke volume, there's a big decline immediately when you start to detrain. The amount of blood extracted with the heart with each beat drops pretty dramatically early on in the detraining period. So the change in VO2 max is largely due to a decrease in stroke volume, a decrease in the ability of the heart to extract blood with each beat. The long-term decrease in VO2 max is due to a decrease in the ability to extract oxygen from the blood. So a lower AVO2 difference. Okay, that's long-term decrease. Short-term decrease, changes in stroke volume. Long-term decrease, changes in AVO2 difference. Okay, how do you prevent detraining? What's the minimum amount of training needed to sustain or maintain fitness and or performance? This is a good question, because if you can identify the minimum training to sustain fitness, you may be able to prolong your endurance career. So reducing training volume by up to 70% for 3 weeks did not negatively influence performance. Wow, 70% for 3 weeks. That's a long period of time, and that's a lot of reduction in training volume. This is a good point to get across to athletes that if they can do some training over a period of 3 weeks like this, they may not detrain that fast. And that's a good thing, because in the real world, maybe you work has to pay attention, that you have to pay attention to work, or maybe it's family life or some other stress that you got to take care of. Well, as long as you can do some training over that period of 3 weeks, you probably can you can lessen the influence of detraining. Now, the art of designing a training program is how to avoid detraining while maintaining performance and reducing the risk of injury. And that ultimately gets to the tapering as well. Trying to taper an athlete is a bit of artwork, and you do need to have some good tools available to be able to do that. And those are tools that you can tap into a training log, either electronically or in writing. Okay, so Noakes talked a little bit about hereditary. He does this in different parts of the chapter, or different parts of the book, and wonders, is there a specific gene that leads to superior endurance ability? There are some genetic tests that you can do now, and there is a marker for endurance ability. So there is some evidence supporting that question, or supporting the answer to that question. It's also important to recognize that some sedentary people just have high VO2 max values, but that doesn't necessarily make them good endurance athletes. That goes back to the inability of VO2 max by itself to predict performance. So, if it's genetic, well, pick your parents wisely. And, obviously that's a sarcastic statement, but there is a component of endurance performance that is genetic. That being said, genes are not going to determine your performance. And the performance of elite athletes, the performance of high-performing age group athletes, the performance of anyone is largely a function of how much work they're willing to put in, how they are able to pay attention to details in training and setting up a training program. And it's not just genetic. It's that almost is too dismissive of the amount of effort that goes into becoming a good endurance athlete. All right, so summary of part 7, training. There's metabolic changes that are rather obvious. Detraining, decreases in VO2 max are initially due to changes in stroke volume. Long-term, more changes in AVO2 difference. And again, the whole point of setting up a training program is to maximize the metabolic changes while minimizing the risk of injury to a person. Okay, we made it through chapter 3. Thanks, everybody.